is Dr. Ivy Branin. I'm a naturopathic doctor in New York City, and this is Mental Health Mondays, where I get to have a conversation with some of my favorite people working in mental health. And if you enjoy this video, as well as any of my other videos, I definitely encourage you to subscribe to both my YouTube channel and also my Instagram, Dr. Ivy Branin on Instagram. And I'm really excited today to have a fellow naturopath. Not only is he a fellow naturopath, but he is one of my mentors, even if he didn't know that, being that he was one of my professors at Bastyr University. And though I never had the opportunity, except for maybe subbing, to actually sit on one of Dr. Lichtenstein's shifts, specifically in biofeedback. I'm just very excited to have him come. And the theme in general this month is all on digestion and gut health. And one of the things that I like about naturopathic medicine in general, and specifically Mental Health Mondays, is looking at the mind-body connection. So it's not just about what we're eating but how is our brain interacting with the different parts of our body. So I'm really excited to have Dr. Brad Lichtenstein with us. And I think that I'm allowed to call him Brad now.
Yes, you are. Yes, you
I was
are.
always very formal, and I'm still very formal. I don't know if it's like the East Coaster, New Yorker in me. I called everybody doctor, even though everyone else was calling everyone by their first names.
Yeah, no, you don't have to do that anymore. No. So nice to see you, Ivy.
Yeah, good to see you. I'm so excited. And I kind of wanted to start off with, I always like to sort of like discuss like origin stories, specifically with like the different healers I talk to. And I kind of want to focus not so much on like your journey of like how you became a naturopath, but kind of like how you transitioned from like naturopath like myself, like, making dietary recommendations and supplements and herbs, to almost basically exclusively mind body based. I find that so fascinating.
Yes. Well, I like how you said origin story. It's actually like a return to origin story, really. Uh, and if anybody's ever heard me speak before, I've always said my mom took me in my first yoga class when I was 7. Um, and we had in our kitchen, we had above the clock on the wall, we had this big poster that was the whole sun salutation. And so we were always interested in, and we, meaning my mother, in health. I became a vegetarian. And so this connects to the whole mind body thing. I became a vegetarian at 13 in Pittsburgh back in the 70s when there wasn't that much. And for the most part, my parents were pretty supportive. My dad liked the red meat. Uh, and so I was always interested in different types of healing. And then actually, when I was 16, um, because of some of my own trauma, I was seeing a psychologist, and he said to me one day, you're really a Taoist. I'm like, 16, I don't know what a Taoist is. And so I started learning about Taoism, and he was teaching me about meditation and a number of things. And that was always the main focus. In my whole life growing up, it was always talking and processing and understanding how you're looking at things. So I went to naturopathic medical school, as you were alluding to, mostly from the health perspective of the physical health, because I had gut problems. I was always eating dairy and no one ever told me. And they said I had IBS and everything. And finally, when I gave up dairy, because as a vegetarian, I ate dairy for 20 years, or 15 years was my main thing. My stomach got better. So I came to a naturopathic medical school, and I was talking about digestion and health, but I was always interested in how people were living. When I graduated, the focus of my career was really on HIV care. It was on HIV care. It was considered still not just a life-threatening illness, it was a terminal illness at that time. Some of the medications weren't there. So my visits with my patients would be an hour to 2 hours. And the first 15 minutes, we talked about diet, nutrition, supplements, and all that stuff. And the rest of the time, we're talking about how are you living? How are you dealing with this diagnosis? How are you working through the medical community that's not being supportive? How are you talking about relationships? It was always that kind of conversation that really inspired me. And so I was doing some of that, biochemical, naturopathic supplements, herbs, diet, nutrition. And then it just became more the focus on, I really want to talk to people about how they're living. And I was part of a study with University of Washington and Bastyr looking at end of life. And so I was offered to be part of this end of life study where I would go to the bedside of hospice patients twice a week to do guided meditations. I've done 500 bedside hospice meditations. So I watched people at the end of their life on morphine, on IV drugs for pain. And I saw what a 20-minute guided meditation did. I saw it relieve people's pain. It didn't last. They came out of the meditation, came back. I saw it increase people's anxiety at times, depending on what the meditation was. And that's when I started to learn biofeedback. And from there, it just all spiraled. There's other things along the way, of course, because it's not that simple. So in my work, I very explicitly tell people I'm really not focused on your diagnosis. IBS, ulcerative colitis, chronic pain. I'm more concerned about how are you living, and we still want to know those symptoms so we can monitor them. Because for me, I'm talking about how you're living regulates your nervous system, regulating your nervous system then impacts all your symptoms. So that's how I look and frame the world. And so I teach breath work is an example for people. I talk about breathing because you can do it on your own, you can do it unconsciously. And the way you breathe can regulate your vagus nerve, your nervous system, helps with gut health. You can make your gut health worse by breathing incorrectly. And part of that whole breathing connects to how are you just focusing on life? What's the meaning and purpose you're giving your life? So there, I think that's the origin story sort of in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's really amazing. So it's already like sparked so many questions, and part of before we got on this Zoom, I was like already telling you that part of this is almost like I just want to pick your brain about certain things. So when you present that to a patient and somebody comes into you for whatever health issue is, and one of the things I also kind of get, I don't want to say annoyed, but there's so much just focus on like the right diagnosis. And when a diagnosis is basically you're just trying to figure out what's going on with the body, the name of the diagnosis is so arbitrary. Whether I have a patient who has endometriosis, PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, ulcerative colitis, yes, that's the diagnosis, but what really led them to the diagnosis is much more important. And I think sometimes there can be so much like holding on to that diagnosis. Now, I am under the assumption that a patient comes into you and they're looking for a strategy, they're looking for help. And how do you, I guess partly it could be that not, part of like that vetting process that, the right patient is, for your practice is open to this other way, but how do you kind of, I think it's also because working in New York City, where I don't say that we're so disconnected, but I was really shocked when I first started my practice here, just that people don't cook, people just don't take Seattle, at least there's like kind of like this base.
Yeah, there is, but let's also remember that in since you've been here too, Seattle's exploded with Amazon, Microsoft, Google, all of those. And we have a lot of people from tech, and that, hey, everyone from tech, I'm not suggesting that tech people aren't connected. But what we're seeing, and I think this goes back to a whole cultural shift, is that where's the 40-hour work week? People don't have 40-hour work weeks. What's a 40-hour work week? And now if people are working from home, many employers are saying, well, now we can start earlier and you don't have to do your commute time. And why I'm saying that is because I think this cultural expectation about work is also killing us. It's not your individual choices, it's culturally manifested. And so people are always on the go and running and doing things. And then when you're done at the end of the day, who wants to cook? I get that. When there was a division of labor and when we worked 9 to 5, as Dolly told us, Dolly Parton said, who works 9 to 5? I think that's part of it because it affects our nervous system. And people come in to see me and they say, okay, I want you to teach me how to regulate my nervous system so I can work 90 hours a week. And I was like, I'm not going to do that. That's not what I do. You mentioned that vetting process. And I would say people read my website, people follow my guided meditations, they do. And so they go, okay, they get a sense of me. So it's self-selecting population. And when people will say, okay, I understand that, but you're not working on my diagnosis. And I say, I'm working on your nervous system. I mean, just don't sleep. I think people get that. If you do not sleep at all for 3 days, you're going to develop psychosis and some other issues.
You actually
Well,
can die. I mean, not with 3 days, but like studies have shown, like there's a
yes.
time that with sleep, it actually causes death.
And the studies with rats, if you cut their sympathetic nerve to their heart, rats will live. They just don't do much. They'll eat, they don't move around a lot. But you cut the parasympathetic, which for the sympathetic is easily, and it's a little bit too simplified, said is the go, 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 fight or flight. But if you think about sympathetic, just actually mobilizes the body, gets it to do things, mobilizes energy. The parasympathetic restores, slows down, helps you heal. It activates parts of the nervous system, the immune system that regulates CD4 cells, NK cells. Those are cells that help fight infection. If you cut the parasympathetic to the heart, the rats will die in a few days. I don't even know because they just keep go, go, go. So if we think of that, I ask everybody to think about throughout their day, how much time were they going? If you wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you're thinking about your job for an hour, you're working, but we don't classify that. So, we have to have an overhaul. And I know that there is a lot of talk in tech, especially with the pandemic and going back to work. People are starting to say, what's really expected? How can I navigate this? So when I talk to patients about that, they seem to get that one. And then I just extend it to their diagnosis. I extend it to the rest of their lives that if you want to have hypertension, I can show you how to raise your blood pressure just by going, we can measure these things, which is one of the reasons I got into biofeedback, because biofeedback is simply putting instrumentation, sensors on different parts of the body, and you can measure things. You can measure how fast your heart is. You can measure the change in your heart. You can measure how much muscle tension you have somewhere, your breathing rate, your sweat. People don't think they sweat in their hands, which is more connected to sympathetic. It could be excitement, like you won the lottery and now you don't have to work anymore, or, oh my God, I'm going to have to work for the rest of my life. But you can see these things, and showing people that is really powerful. They said, I'm not stressed. I'm not thinking about anything. It's like, well, your heart rate's elevating, your muscle tension in your jaw is going off the chart, and you're sweating in your hands. And then people get a sense of like, I see that that's happening when I'm just thinking about going back to work or thinking about cooking after a long day. So going back to that whole point of like, how do people find me, or how do I explain this? That's part of what I do. And I think I think for the most part, people understand. Some people just say, I don't have time to think about my life.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I mean, I've had patients that frankly know that all of their issues stem from their high stress life. And they will say to me, Dr. Ivy, yeah, I could do yoga or meditate or whatever. I just don't have the time. Just give me the adrenal supplement, give me the diet, and let's call it a day. And maybe 5 years from now, I'll revisit. And, you know, I always try to meet my patients where they're at, but ideally I would like, so much more. And where that change come from, where that can come from, I'm not always so sure. But sometimes it can be, just small changes that can ease a patient to some more mindfulness techniques. Now, I was thinking also, back to talking a little bit about the biofeedback and how, so you have these devices, and I know that you as well are more or less like 100% virtual. So when it comes to biofeedback, how are you currently implementing that, and actually even how like that process works? So obviously the patient is recognizing, oh, heart rate is up, I'm stressed. It's kind of similar how like convincing a patient, oh, you're pre-diabetic because your hemoglobin A1C is here and your glucose, and so kind of talk a little bit like not just from recognizing, but then and how that can be a tool to, I guess, teach the patient to do some self-regulation.
Yes, that's a great question. Several of my patients, not all of them, buy some biofeedback sensors. So I was doing that. The goal of biofeedback is really to not need the biofeedback anymore. That's the original goal. The original goal is, okay, I'm noticing that sweat going up. I can feel that change. I mean, and that's really not appreciable. It's not like we're talking about their hands or sweat is dripping off. It's to get a sense of like, I can feel that change in my nervous system. So that's the intention of biofeedback, not to need machines. During the pandemic, the lockdown, most of my patients didn't have anything. And we relied on the old experience of like, can you take time to notice what's happening to your posture, your muscle tension? I have them have logs so they can start to think of it, and they start to become more aware. If I use the breath, for example, a lot of people after their first session come back to me and say, I didn't realize how often I'm holding my breath. Or I didn't realize how often I'm going, and then they say, wow, I did that like all day long. So as long as they're getting some awareness, that's helpful. Some of my patients do buy some sensors. There's a lot on the market now about heart rate variability. There are so many trackers. There's Aura rings and Whoops and Fitbits.
I got what your opinion was, so you beat me to it.
There's tons of apps about it. And I will tell you, I have several videos on my YouTube about how to use some of these apps, and they're already outdated because they keep updating them. But I find so many people then become fixated on a number.
Oh, 100%.
My score is this. How do I get it bigger? It's like, for what reason? So that's when the education piece comes from me and saying, you know what? The more you effort to try to make something change, the more you're activating your sympathetic nervous system. So every martial artist out there, every athlete, every performer has learned this. It's like, okay, I got to learn the steps. Then I have to, what do they say? Let it go, flow with it. That's what we're talking about. How can we do without doing, without the effort? People talk about being versus doing. And I think that's also misguided because the being is a doing. It's called allowing. It's how do I let this chair, for example, hold me up? I'm trying to sit up and hold myself up, or can I just allow? Okay, the chair's going to hold me. I'm not going to fall over. Can I allow? So that's the kind of doing I'm talking about. It's allowing. And so with heart rate variability, I do at least once a week get an email from someone somewhere saying, how do I improve my heart rate variability score? This app out there. And I'm like, can we relax into it? For people who don't know what that is, heart rate variability, heart rate variability is the change in your heart rate over time. So most people think their heart rate stays static. It's like 60 beats per minute. If it's 60 beats per minute and it was static, it would be 1,000 milliseconds. Every 1,000 milliseconds, your heart would beat. Nobody's is like that, unless you have a pacemaker. So anybody who's listening, you could just put your fingers on your pulse and just take a big breath in, and you'll feel, for most of us, your heart rate speed up. And then as you exhale, you'll feel your heart rate slow down. in broad strokes. That's variability. And it's connected to your nervous system. There's so many factors about that. And it is a really good indicator of overall health, but not the measurements most of us take, not the people who are wearing the ring. It's a measurement of overall health if you do a 24-hour Holter monitor reading, what a cardiologist does. But the apps do show something. And while I'm excited that there's so much ways of getting data that people can learn to self-regulate, I do get confused that people become so attached to that data that then they're not allowing, that they're efforting. And that's the dance we constantly have to work. We have to constantly walk, is what I was going to say. In one of the downsides of mind-body medicine, whether it's meditation, mindfulness meditation, guided imagery, all of those amazing techniques, I see people whose conditions get worse and they say, oh, did I not do it right? Am I not doing it enough? Do I need to meditate more? And that's where my hospice study comes in. And I worked with people who, when you're in hospice, you have 3 weeks. 3 weeks, usually 3.5 weeks is the average life expectancy of people who enter hospice. We know what's going to happen. The question is, how do you want to be in those 3.5 weeks? And that's the question I'm asking everybody as well. See, when I start to talk about my hospice experience, a lot of the patients who are those go, go, go getters say, oh, I get what you're talking about. So I'm answering a few questions all at once. I think the apps out there are interesting, but please do not take them as the definitive answer, especially heart rate variability. So many other factors, your sleep, time of day that you're measuring it, how much green tea you're having, caffeine, all of those will impact it. And people don't necessarily realize that. So,
Yeah, because also I feel like it's, I see this also like in my practice. I mean, sometimes it can even create sort of like this, like a new type of neuroticism, but also I feel like as practitioners, or at least one of my hopes with my patients is that they do develop a stronger sense, like a stronger internal sense, and not, I mean, yes, like having some external information guiding that person towards healthier changes. I mean, it's very similar when we think about now we have nutritional labels for everything. But what's actually very fascinating is that most of the nutritional labels we have, the margin of error that they allow is it's like 20%. And so if you're just going by the nutritional label alone, you can easily be undershooting, overshooting it. And I also even can get caught up in specifically over the pandemic. I was somebody, I commute to an office. As a New Yorker, we walk a lot, but I was like finding most of my days I would be really at home. And so I got a little bit obsessed with my, the pedometer on my phone. Like, oh, like if I didn't have my phone with me during the walk, and actually, to be honest, I'm somebody who, the more time I can spend away from any of my devices, the better. And it's like, why do I need this phone to tell me that I did it correctly, that I did the correct number of steps?
because we don't, like you said, we don't check in with ourselves. We need this external validation. And I think that that's also a cultural thing right now. The more social media, and I know we're using social media, the more social media use you have, use it effectively, use it for your benefit. But the more we just scroll on that and see everything, we're constantly seeking validation. I mean, and so it just becomes this, did I get my steps in? I have an Oura ring. I have all the devices. I buy them to test them. And I would look at my Oura ring and see how I slept that night. And I know I woke up at 3:00. Something woke me up, but I spent the rest of the night meditating in bed and it said I was sleeping. I was like, I wasn't sleeping. Now that meditation can impact my nervous system, but people say to me all the time, I didn't sleep well. My Oura ring told me. I said, well, how do you feel? Okay, but now I don't feel okay because my Oura ring app told me it's like, it didn't tell you that. it's a guesstimate.
Mm-hmm.
So it actually, like with the sleep is a guesstimate for all of those apps because it's based on how much you move, your blood flow, your breathing. So it's calculating a number of things to say, well, that must mean you're sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not true. So people forget that. Yes, if we can then come internal and say, wait, how am I feeling? How do I know? I think if we really did that in life, I imagine most of us wouldn't overwork. There would be a revolt in the work industry, uh, and I think people would feel a lot differently. When I went to school, I was just going to say, when I went to school, I remember it wasn't Dr. Bastyr, but I think it was Dr. Mitchell. Somebody said, you know what we need to heal. Everybody knows that. You need sunlight, you need movement, you need fresh, good food, clean water, connection, social connect. That's what you need. What's getting in the way of all that?
That's
Yeah.
so true. And then I think like also like the other big thing is like you more of my patients reading things on Google and all this kind of stuff, that everything is so variable. Even with sleep, yes, like we always say, like 7 or 8 hours, but there are some people that are what they call they're genetically short sleepers, where they actually get like 4 to 5 hours of sleep for them is actually sufficient. I mean, it's a very small percentage of the population, but so to get so fixated in these numbers, though, I did kind of wanted to pick your brain about number, and thinking like how we were talking about like how important the parasympathetic nervous system is, and in fact that we can't survive without it, yet we can somewhat survive without the sympathetic. I mean, are there like, again, like I hate numbers, but thinking about like, should we be spending like 80% of our time in parasympathetic? Like I do this even for myself, like because I think when we had spoke I think it was a few weeks ago, I was talking about how I dance, and one of the things when we think about with dance is like you're always usually your rest and then your attack, and rest and like you're transitioning from, but you're kind of always going back to, or I guess similarly in yoga or any of these other practices where you might be doing a motion, but you go back to your center place, your foundation,
Mm.
asana, or if we think about in ballet, you're always going back to fifth position. Let's just say that. So kind of with that kind of idea, or your own opinion.
That's a great idea, or a great topic, because there's another aspect of this. So when we are exercising, for instance, we're always in sympathetic. When you're exercising, for anybody who knows heart rate variability, your heart rate variability decreases. You're in sympathetic, your heart rate's going up. But of course you want that, and then we want to be able to come back. So it is this back and forth, as you're saying. When it comes to some of our day, I think of it in this broad stroke. If you look evolutionarily, I mean, and people debate this, of course, but even hunter and gatherers didn't work more than 15 hours a week, according to some new research. Everybody's going to say they can cite something else. I think of the nervous system as basically 888. And what I mean by that is 8 hours of go, 8 hours of activity, not necessarily all at once, sympathetic, 8 hours of sleep, again, give or take, because I can't remember sleeping 8 hours. I mean, I had to be very sick because I always woke up at 6 o'clock in the morning since I was an infant. It's like, let's go, come on. Yeah. But so if we just say broad strokes, 8 hours, then the other 8 hours I conceptualize as active rest. Active rest, sleep, I think of as passive rest. We just go and, we go to sleep. You have to settle your nervous system. You have to feel safe enough. You have to feel safe enough to allow yourself to drift off to sleep. And for a lot of people, it's not safe. It's not safe to not problem solve, not to be thinking about work. It's not safe to close your eyes. So I think that's a very important thing. And that's actually a key to what I do in my work, talking about safety. The active rest is where you're not just scrolling on Facebook, not just doing Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus. I've got them all, spending the whole day doing that. There's a way to do that that's in this active rest where you're engaged with what you're doing. And that's the way I think about it. You're actively engaged, you're feeling safe, and you're connecting. So if I'm watching ballet this year, I watched Pacific Northwest Ballet as a subscriber online, which I actually liked really well because I could see them better. But if I'm watching that and I'm engaged with it, if I'm watching or I'm reading a book or if I'm writing or if I'm dancing, yes, dancing's different than watching. Yes, my nervous system is activated, but I'm engaged. The dominant function is not go, go, go to mobilize, and it's not shut down. It's like I'm engaged with the process. This conversation right now could actually be engagement and not work for me because I'm excited to talk to you about these conversations. And that's doing something different for my nervous system because it's not on alert. It's not like, now it could be, I could be going, oh, I hope I don't say something stupid and everybody's going to. Then I'm already engaged in this conversation defensively. Or I'm like, wow, this is great. I get to talk to someone I haven't talked to for a while. We talk to share these. So that's what I'm saying is active rest. So when you say you go dancing, yeah, there's some sympathetic there. Yeah, it's going to be dominant. But then you're also engaging with the process. When you're writing, you're journaling, you're painting, you're going for a leisurely walk, you're engaging with nature, with your own person, with someone else. I think that's a different part of the nervous system. And we call that the active rest part. And so that's the way I think of it. I don't know how many people do 888. I think most of us go, go, go until it's time to collapse. And so we've trained our nervous system to say, if I'm awake, I have to be doing a lot of stuff. And the only time I cannot is when I go to sleep. So we teach ourselves and we've trained ourselves. We've conditioned our body to go, okay, I'm sitting down now, fall asleep.
Hmm.
I don't think that's healthy at all because we don't know how to regulate and be here and engage with others. So that's my thought about a lot of those things. And then I think about what we do in our day. I remember one of my patients prior to the pandemic was saying, oh, getting stuck in traffic on her way home. And the student clinicians and I were thinking, oh, stress. Okay, there's it. She said, I love it. You love traffic? And she said, I get to listen to my audiobooks. I'm away from my kids. My husband's got the kids. My husband's at home. I don't have to worry about anyone for an hour. And I was like, wow, never thought of it that way. So that was active engagement. She still had to be alert so she could drive, but she was engaging.
It's funny. I feel the same way about flying. I actually really like flying because it's like the one time where I feel like, because I think for like, and I mean, I don't think I'm alone with this, but there can be sort of like this like guilt or like shame. Like it's funny. I even as a naturopath was experiencing this yesterday. So I used to work on Sundays. I used to see patients on Sundays, and I've since during the pandemic have decided no longer, unless it's really important. And I was supposed to have some plans, and they got canceled. And there was part of me that was like, okay, I should be working. And I chose not to. And I've been reading this really fantastic book, but there was I had to keep reminding myself, like, it's okay. You can work on Monday. You can like literally look at your patient's charts. You can read their labs. You can get back to those emails on Monday. You don't need to be working right now, even if you aren't necessarily seeing any of your friends or whatever. Like, you can just sit and read this book that you actually really like and you're getting a lot out of.
And you are not alone in that. I suffer from that myself. I'm much better at sitting, and so saying, I'm going to just sit here and do this. And yet in the back, there's a narrative that's like, what the heck are you doing? And I was like, I'm resting. Okay. And so I understand that. And I actually have heard that about flying from somebody now that you said that. I've heard that from a few people saying, I'm offline. Nobody can contact me. I like these. I want longer flights. And I was like, oh, great idea. So yes, I understand that. I think that's what most of us think. It's like, I should be I should be working on my side hustle. That, I think, is a very detrimental narrative that most of us have. And people listening, you might go, well, but I have so much to do. It's like, yeah, I understand if you're trying to get out of a situation. I do understand that. And yet, we're getting this narrative put into our head that you really should always be doing something to work on this. Like, really? I think that's activating that nervous system. So then what you just said, using some of my other language that I talk about, is resting has become a threat. Resting has become an adversary, and we start doing battle with reading that book. We start doing battle with taking an afternoon off. And that's not helping our nervous system either. Yeah. And that's when we rely on all those other things. If I'm watching if I'm watching Netflix, or if I'm doing any other things, and not to denigrate this or say that there's no benefit, but thinking of people, in the state of Washington, cannabis is legal. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people will use it because then it allows them to settle. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't benefits to it, but look what we all do. We put ourselves in positions so that we can be okay with sitting, resting, reading, engaging, talking to people. I don't have time to talk to people on phone. I'm going to text them. Yes, I'm going to say that to everybody. What happened to calling people? That regulates your nervous system more than the texts. There's enough data, I think, to suggest that. So it's hearing the other person's voice that regulates our nervous system. But, we got to keep going.
So true. So true. Wow. I know that we don't have that much time. I don't know. Would you be able to tell? I just love this story. I don't know if you have enough time. I love the cigarette story. I think it's like encapsulates your work, or not your work, but like I think it just is like I just love that story. And then we can.
Was that the story of the gentleman who quit smoking? And I
love this story. I don't know. Sorry.
That was one of my very first patients after I graduated, and he, 65-year-old man, I believe he was like in his late 60s at the time, and he got diagnosed with lung cancer. And so he started smoking. He was about 67 or 70 at the time. He started smoking when he was 12. And he said, I'm quitting smoking and I'm quitting coffee, because he had to do those together because he couldn't smoke. And he said, you can't drink coffee without a cigarette. So he was talking about how difficult it was. And I said, well, when you smoke, what are you doing? I said, you're taking a long inhale in, and nobody goes, you're going, and I said, let's just, this was 25 years ago. I said, just do that. Just see what happens when you, and so he was sitting in my office and went, but he felt the change. And all of a sudden he said, oh my God, I feel that. So I saw him. My office was on Capitol Hill on 12th Street, 12th Avenue in Capitol Hill. And I could see from my window him standing at the bus stop. And I saw him walking around the bus stop going, and he felt the change. He said, I didn't care what anybody said. I was just smoking. And I think that's one of the benefits of smoking. Yes, there's nicotine. Yes, there's all those other things. Even thinking about smoking other things. I'm not an advocate of smoking because lung health is really important. And every time you inhale, you speed up your sympathetic. That's a natural occurrence. But then when you take that pause and then you slow, if that exhale is equal or longer than the inhale, you're increasing the vagal nerve. That's the 10th cranial nerve that slows down the heart. It goes straight to the heart, the sinoatrial node of the heart, and slows it down. Sympathetic activation of the heart takes a few seconds, but vagal parasympathetic stimulation of the heart is instantaneous. So that's a great take home for everybody. Just act like you're smoking. You don't have to do this, and you don't have to breathe in through the mouth. Just let that exhale be slow and luxurious, and your heart will begin to slow down. Yeah, there. Don't need cigarettes. That was so simple.
So that is like literally one of, I think, when we were talking like a week or so ago, like, 3 of the things that you had mentioned in your class, and that was one of them that I still use with patients because I just love that so much. So how can people, one, get in touch with you, and also, do you have anything? So today is what, July 26th,
Yes.
2021, just in case people are watching this in the future. Uh, Tell us, like, also if you have anything coming up in the next
Thank
you want to build as well.
Well, one thing, I do guided meditations. I've started this last March during the pandemic. I've been doing guided meditations, 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes every Monday and Thursday. And it's free, and it's on my web page, thebreathspace.com. And I have a heading called meditations, and people can go there. You can just live stream it. It's also on YouTube. On that meditation page, I have a lot of recorded guided meditations. So people can use those. I'm also on the Insight Timer. I'm also doing my meditations through Clubhouse as well. And I'm going to be having some more workshops coming up in the future, but people can always join my mailing list at thebreathspace.com, and they can always reach me through there.
Thank you so much, Brad. This has been amazing. And everyone, again, my name is Dr. Ivy Branin. I'm a naturopathic doctor in New York City. And again, today is July 26th, 2021. Next week, very excited, on Instagram at 12. I'm kind of like shifting things up next week. I'm interviewing actually a comedian, Dion Flynn, and we're going to talk about the mindfulness of improv, because he is running an amazing workshop retreat at Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York. And then also that week on Wednesday, August 4th, I am also kind of mixing things up. I'm having an conversation with Sylvie Hart, who is actually a stylist, but we're going to talk about sort of how can we accept our bodies and address ourselves no matter where we're at. So it should be kind of like an interesting conversation. And she just has like a wonderful way of putting things, and she also has some interesting stories. So again, my name is Dr. Ivy Branin, naturopathic doctor, and if you are liking what you watched, please subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me on Instagram at Dr. Ivy Branin. And I'll hopefully see you next time, and have a wonderful day or wonderful morning. Bye.
Thank you.